Hollywood is in absolute chaos as Blake Lively, Colleen Hoover, and Justin Baldoni find themselves tangled in a storm of lawsuits, power struggles, and shocking accusations surrounding the film adaptation of It Ends With Us. What began as Baldoni's dream project has now turned into one of the most explosive scandals in recent memory, with Hoover suddenly siding with Blake in a move that stunned fans and fueled suspicions of a calculated takeover. Insiders claim Blake leveraged sexual harassment, claims to trigger a morality clause in Baldoni's contract, stripping him of creative control. While Hoover quietly switched to top-tier lawyers and launched her own production company, Heartbones Entertainment whispers suggest Blake and Colleen orchestrated the fallout to reclaim the rights and reshape the project, while Baldoni was left isolated and his reputation destroyed. Fans point to Blake's cryptic social media moves, Hoover's sudden retirement, and suspiciously timed legal shifts as evidence of a deeper plan, a ruthless Hollywood chess match where morality and victimhood may have been used as weapons to seize power, leaving the industry and the public divided over whether this was genuine justice or the most strategic manipulation. In years, one thing is certain. Starscope can confirm this story is only just beginning, and the truth behind It Ends With Us has become more shocking than the fiction itself. The shocking truth behind the scandal surrounding Blake Lively, Colleen Hoover, and Justin Baldoni is something that has left Hollywood fans and insiders gasping for air, because what started as a passion project, a dream come true. The beloved novel, It Ends With Us, transforming into a major motion picture, has turned into a battlefield dripping with betrayal, power plays, and manipulation that no one saw coming. And the deeper you go, the darker it gets. Because Justin Baldoni, the man who fought tooth and nail to bring this story to the big screen, was once celebrated as the visionary behind the adaptation, yet slowly and methodically, he was pushed to the sidelines, erased from his own creation by the very people he once trusted and admired. And when you peel back the layers, it becomes clear this was not some innocent twist of fate. This was a calculated, ruthless chess match designed to destroy him and elevate others. Blake Lively, who entered the project with star power and media adoration, quickly became the center of attention, shifting the narrative in her favor, while Colleen Hoover, the author herself, subtly aligned with her in a move that blindsided Justin and his supporters. Fans who followed every detail of this saga watched in shock as Blake and Colleen began rewriting the story, not just on screen but behind the scenes, in courtrooms, in boardrooms, and through whispers that echoed across Hollywood corridors. And what makes this all the more devastating is the allegation that Blake used accusations of sexual harassment not as a pursuit of justice but as a weapon to invoke a morality clause hidden deep within Justin's contract, a clause that stripped him of creative authority and placed the project firmly in the hands of others. And as this unfolded, Colleen Hoover suddenly switched. Lawyers upgraded her legal team to Hollywood heavyweights, and without warning launched her own production company, Heartbones Entertainment. And it was this move that lit the match for conspiracy theories, because fans and legal analysts alike could not ignore the timing, the precision, the almost surgical way everything fell into place, leaving Justin isolated and silenced, his reputation dragged through the mud as Blake and Colleen quietly maneuvered themselves into positions of absolute control. And the internet erupted with speculation. Was this justice for a woman wronged, or was this the most cunning manipulation Hollywood had seen in decades? Because when you follow the trail of actions, the cryptic posts on social media, the sudden announcement of Colleen's retirement from writing, the carefully timed leaks to the press, it all paints the picture of two women pulling strings in the shadows, turning Justin from visionary to villain overnight. And Starscope has followed every twist, every leaked email, every subtle shift in strategy. And the more we uncover, the more this resembles not just a fight over a film, but a ruthless power struggle where morality, victimhood, and public perception were weaponized to destroy an opponent and seize control of a story that millions love but now feels tainted by scandal and betrayal. And as Hollywood insiders whisper about non-disclosure agreements, secret settlements, and the possibility of backroom deals, one cannot help but wonder if the audience has only seen the tip of the iceberg, because what lies beneath is far darker, more shocking, and far more destructive than anyone dares to admit. And this is only the beginning. The intensity rises even higher, and the revelations become darker and more suffocating, because by this stage in the scandal, it was no longer just whispers behind closed doors. It was no longer quiet speculation in the corners of Hollywood circles. It had exploded into something far larger, something that captured headlines across mainstream outlets and social media platforms, and the way it played out made it look less like a random series of events and more like a perfectly choreographed takedown of Justin Baldoni, a man who only wanted to bring a powerful story to life, yet instead found himself buried under accusations, betrayals, and carefully orchestrated narratives. And the shocking element here is how the puzzle pieces aligned in ways that seem impossible to dismiss, because right when Justin believed he had the support of the author of the very book he was adapting, Colleen Hoover suddenly revealed her shifting alliances, smiling alongside Blake, lively at photo ops announcing bold new ventures and hinting at projects without Justin in sight, leaving fans to question what kind of conversations had been happening behind closed doors. And the most disturbing part is that none of this was accidental. The lawsuits, the leaked emails, the cryptic statements made in interviews were all part of a pressure campaign. A campaign that seemed to trap Justin in a corner where every move he made was twisted into evidence against him, and fans who once adored Blake Lively began to turn divided, some defending her fiercely, while others demanded to know why an actress with no prior attachment to the project was suddenly in full command of the adaptation, and why Colleen Hoover, whose words had inspired millions, would abandon the man who had fought so passionately to bring those words to the screen. And when analysts broke down the timeline, the coincidences piled up. Blake's sudden accusations coming at the exact moment Justin's creative authority was most vulnerable. Colleen's company announcement surfacing, in perfect sync with contract negotiations, Hollywood lawyers stepping in with ruthless precision, each event stacking atop the other, until Justin's entire career seemed to teeter on the brink, and the emotional devastation here is overwhelming. Because for Justin, this was not simply about a movie. It was about his name, his legacy, his years of effort erased in the blink of an eye and manipulated into a weapon against him. And the more you examine the moves of Blake Lively, the more chilling it becomes, because her carefully curated public image of grace and elegance now hides whispers of cunning strategy of using victimhood not as healing, but as power, a weapon wielded with devastating effect. And this is where the audience becomes trapped in the loop, because each revelation feels like the peak of the drama, yet the next revelation only climbs higher. The suggestion that Colleen and Blake were not just coincidental allies, but deliberate partners in reshaping the future of the story fans adored raises haunting questions, and Starscope continues to ask them. Because if Blake Lively could rise in this way, if Colleen Hoover could pivot from beloved author to ruthless business operator, then what chance did Justin have? And what does this mean for every other creator in Hollywood who thinks passion and vision are enough when in reality the game is dominated by power, by lies, by weaponized morality? And as we peel further into the shadows, it becomes clear that this story has not reached its end. It has only revealed the beginning of something far more destructive. The storm intensifies and every detail begins to feel more sinister, more premeditated, more carefully orchestrated, because the deeper you look, the more the lies overlap, the more the betrayals connect, and the more it seems as if Justin Baldoni was never meant to succeed at all. Because while the public narrative painted him as a man flailing under the weight of controversy behind the scenes, there were forces aligning forces that wanted him erased from the very project he had fought. For from the very dream he had invested his life into, and here is where the shadows grow darker, because the whispers start to sound less like coincidences and more like confessions. Blake Lively positioning herself as the face of the adaptation, Colleen Hoover choosing silence when her voice could have stopped the destruction. Hollywood insiders leaking just enough to twist public perception, and the lawyers circling like vultures feeding on the chaos. And when you examine the timeline closely, you see that the so-called missteps from Justin were never his alone. They were magnified, spun, manipulated, and served on silver platters to an audience hungry for scandal. And you begin to ask yourself who was feeding those stories, who was benefiting from his downfall. And every answer leads back to the same cold realization that this was a chess game, and Justin was not the king. He was the pawn sacrificed, so others could rise. And yet what makes this chapter unbearable is the cruelty in how it was carried out, because Justin had dedicated himself to honoring Colleen's work. He had envisioned a film that could inspire millions, yet at the height of his commitment, he was betrayed, left standing in the wreckage of his own dream, while the very people he trusted stepped over him to claim power. And what cuts deepest is that Colleen Hoover, the author adored by fans for her vulnerability and emotional storytelling, chose ambition over loyalty, chose business over humanity, leaving her collaborator crushed under the weight of silence. Her silence screamed louder than any words, and it allowed Blake Lively to shine, to twist victimhood into a crown, to hold her head high as the world cheered oblivious to the blood spilled, behind the curtain, and the loop becomes unbearable because every revelation feeds another question. How could Colleen betray so easily? How could Blake weaponize sympathy so effectively? How could Hollywood enable the destruction of a man who only wanted to tell a story? And the answer lies in the brutal truth of the industry, that image is power. That narrative is currency that lies, if repeated enough times, become accepted as fact. And this realization rips through the audience because it exposes a reality no one wants to admit, that fame is built not on talent, but on destruction. That careers rise, not on brilliance, but on betrayal. And as Starscope unravels this web, you feel the suffocation building in your chest. Because the truth is not just shocking, it is terrifying. It shows you that nothing you see is real. That every smiling photo, every staged interview, every press release is a piece of the performance. And behind it all is a battlefield where reputations are destroyed, where allies turn enemies, where dreams are crushed without mercy. And in that battlefield, Justin Baldoni fell. Not because he failed, but because he was targeted, because his passion made him vulnerable, because his trust was turned against him. And as you realize this, the story pulls you in deeper, because if it happened to him, it can happen to anyone. And the suspense loops again, because the deeper we go, the darker it becomes. And the question that lingers is not just what happened, but who planned it, who benefited, and how far will they go to keep the truth buried? Because if this scandal exposed anything, it is that the surface has only been scratched. The real secrets are still hiding in the shadows, waiting to be dragged into the lighter ups, into a storm that refuses to settle. Because every thread we pull from this twisted scandal reveals another knot, another deception, another calculated betrayal that shows just how deep this darkness runs. And the more we dive into it, the more it feels like Justin Baldoni was never simply the collateral damage, he was the intended target from the very beginning. Because the lies did not happen by accident, the leaks were not random, the silence was not passive. It was all designed, layer by layer, built with such precision that it leaves you gasping. Because it was never about mistakes. It was about execution of a plan to erase him, to silence him, to break him so completely that he would never rise again. And the most terrifying part is how seamlessly it unfolded, because on the surface, everything appeared normal. Colleen Hoover smiling for fans, Blake lively praised for her perfect image, Hollywood insiders applauding every move as if justice had been served. When in truth, injustice was the engine driving it all, and the deeper you stare into these shadows, the more horrifying it becomes, because Blake Lively played her role with ruthless perfection, painting herself as untouchable, as adored, as flawless, while quietly pulling strings that tightened around Justin's throat, leaving him gasping while the world clapped for her performance. And Colleen Hoover, who could have stopped it, chose instead to step aside to cloak herself in silence and neutrality, while her collaborator was being shredded by wolves in broad daylight. Her silence was not innocence, it was complicity. It was betrayal dressed as cowardice. And when you think of Hollywood's power games, this scandal becomes the purest reflection. Because here, reputations are traded like currency. Friendships are discarded like trash, and dreams are sacrificed without hesitation. And Justin Baldoni's dream became the blood price for their ambition. The shocking weight of this realization crashes down like a wave that will not end, because the manipulation was so flawless, the lies so carefully crafted that the audience never knew they were watching a performance. They believed the false narratives, they repeated the distorted stories, they turned their backs on a man who had given his everything, and this is where the loop grips you tighter. Because you cannot escape the thought that this was never about justice. It was about power. It was about image. It was about two women using silence and deception as weapons to build their thrones and crush the one man who dared to stand in their way. And when you think about that, you cannot help but feel the suffocating dread. Because if this is what fame requires, if this is how success is won, then every smile you see, every triumph celebrated is built on a grave of betrayal and destruction. And as we reveal this through Starscope, you feel the rage boiling, the disgust rising. Because this is not just Hollywood. This is a machine that chews people up and spits them out, and it never stops. And Justin Baldoni became its latest victim. Not because he was weak, but because he was honest. And honesty has no place in an empire built on lies. And as the loop spins again, you realize the horror is not over, because the deeper this scandal cuts, the more we see that this was only the beginning. The darkest revelations are still hiding, still waiting, still tightening their grip around the story. And when they emerge, the world will not just be shocked, it will be shattered. Drags us deeper into the abyss where the shadows become unbearable and the lies turn into suffocating walls. Because as the story unravels, you begin to see that what Blake Lively and Colleen Hoover constructed was not just a scandal, it was an empire of deception. An empire built brick by brick on manipulation, betrayal, and ruthless ambition. And Justin Baldoni was not simply cast aside. He was hunted, cornered, and devoured in front of an audience that did not even realize they were complicit. And this realization cuts like a knife. Because every applause, every cheer, every piece of praise heaped onto Blake Lively's image was blood drawn from his silence. His suffering, his erasure, and the loops spin darker. Because you ask yourself how. Could they do this? How could Colleen Hoover, a woman who shared dreams and collaborations with Justin, choose to let the wolves sink their teeth into him without raising her voice? Without lifting a hand, without even whispering a warning? It was not negligence, it was cruelty, wrapped in cowardice. A silence that screamed louder than words. And Blake Lively orchestrated it all like a puppeteer pulling strings with a smile on her face, while presenting herself as flawless, untouchable, adored. And what makes it even more revolting is the way the industry protected her, showering her with praise while the man she destroyed was painted as the villain stripped of dignity and left gasping for air in a narrative he never wrote. And the truth becomes unbearable because the deeper you stare into this labyrinth, the more you realize there was never an accident. No random misunderstanding, no mistake. This was design, this was execution, this was annihilation, disguised as brilliance, and as you feel the loop pulling tighter, you cannot escape the dread that this is what Hollywood thrives on. Feeding on the dreams of the innocent, to sustain the thrones of the ruthless, crushing honesty, to preserve the lies of the powerful, sacrificing truth so that the image of perfection can survive. And when you think of Justin Baldoni, silenced, erased, condemned without a trial, you feel rage burn in your chest because it could have been stopped. Colleen could have stopped it. The industry could have stopped it, but they chose the spectacle, they chose the lie, they chose to watch a man's career turn to ash and clap for the fire. And what makes it even more horrifying is knowing this is not just one scandal, not just one story. It is the very blueprint of fame, because behind every smile on a red carpet, behind every perfect headline, behind every carefully crafted photo, lies another betrayal, another silence, another destruction waiting to be uncovered. And so the loops trap you in, the same thought again and again. Blake Lively's empire stands not because of brilliance, not because of honesty, not because of talent, but because of deception, manipulation, betrayal, and a publicist willing to lie at any cost. And Colleen Hoover's silence was not protection. It was poison dripping quietly into the veins of a story that should have been truth, but became corruption. And the darkest part is that it worked. They won. They shattered Justin. They silenced him. They buried him under their performance, and the world applauded. And as you realize this, you cannot look away, because the weight of this betrayal is too heavy, the loops too strong, and the horror too real. And in the end, as the smoke clears and the echoes of the lies still ring in the air, you are left with the shattered pieces of a story that was never meant to be told. Because Blake Lively and Colleen Hoover did not just create a scandal, they created a weapon designed to silence, to destroy, to erase. And Justin Baldoni was the target of that weapon, stripped of his dignity, stripped of his voice, forced to watch as the world turned its back on him, while the ones who betrayed him smiled under the bright lights and the loops spin endlessly. Because you realize this is not just about one man, one woman, one scandal. This is about a system built on cruelty, a machine that feeds on destruction and celebrates the ruins it leaves behind. And what makes the wound deeper is knowing that it was not inevitable. It was not fate. It was not destiny. It was choice. It was decision. It was betrayal carried out with precision and wrapped in smiles. And the silence of Colleen Hoover becomes unbearable because her refusal to speak, her decision to remain in the shadows, allowed the lies to grow stronger, allowed the destruction to spread further, allowed the pain to deepen beyond repair. And so the story lingers in your mind because you cannot escape the weight of it. You cannot ignore the screams. Beneath the silence, you cannot forget the man who was silenced and buried, while the empire of lies continues to shine. And in that realization, you are left with a haunting truth that perfection is a mask, fame is a performance, and behind the curtain, of Hollywood brilliance lies the darkest corruption imaginable, and as you take that final breath with the story still echoing in your mind, you know this will never leave you because betrayal at this scale does not fade. It becomes a scar. It becomes a reminder. It becomes the truth that no matter how bright the lights shine, they will never erase the shadows they hide.